Most people think staying married for 40 years means never fighting. But watch an old couple at breakfast sometime. Notice how they might disagree about the smallest things, how to load the dishwasher, which route to take to the store. Yet there's something different in how they argue. Something softer. This isn't the relationship they started with. The couple who walked down the aisle 4 decades ago? They're not the same people sitting across from each other now. And that's actually the secret. What happens inside a person's mind after sharing a life with someone for 40 years? What changes in how they think, how they love, how they see the world? The answer surprises most people. It's not what the wedding vows promised. It's something stranger. Something that takes most of a lifetime to understand. And it starts with something they had to forget. Remember what we're told about love when we're young. That it's a feeling. A lightning bolt. Something that happens to you, not something you do. People married 40 years learned to forget that idea. Not because the feeling disappeared, but because they discovered something underneath it. Something more like a decision that gets made over and over again, in small moments on ordinary days. There's a word psychologists use for this: companionate love. It sounds boring compared to passionate love, doesn't it? But here's what researchers found when they studied long-married couples. The brain activity wasn't less. It was just different. Different parts lighting up. The parts connected to deep attachment, to safety, to knowing someone so well their presence becomes part of your normal. Young love asks, "How do you make me feel?" Old love asks something else entirely. Something quieter but harder to answer. Watch someone married 40 years look at their partner across a crowded room. There's a recognition there that goes beyond words. A knowing that doesn't need to announce itself. But recognition alone isn't enough. They had to learn something harder. Here's something nobody tells you about long marriage. It requires a special kind of forgetting. Not about the big things. Not about anniversaries or important moments or the promises you made. But about the small annoyances. The repeated stories. The habits that used to drive you crazy on a Tuesday afternoon. Couples married 40 years have trained their brains differently. Research shows they literally see their partner through a softer lens. When younger couples focus on their partner's flaws, cataloging them, remembering them, bringing them up during arguments, long-married couples have learned to shift their focus elsewhere. It's not pretending the flaws don't exist. It's choosing what deserves attention and what doesn't. What matters to the story you're building together and what's just noise. Think about a photo you've looked at for years hanging on your wall. Eventually, you stop seeing certain details. Not because they vanished, but because your brain decided they weren't important to what makes that picture meaningful. Long-married people do this with each other. They've edited down to what matters. They've learned what's worth noticing and what isn't. But this selective seeing took practice. It took something most people don't expect. It took being willing to be completely wrong. Young couples fight to win. Old couples fight to understand. That shift? It's enormous. It changes everything about how their brains process conflict, about what they're trying to achieve when they disagree. When you've been married 40 years, you've been wrong so many times you've lost count. You've been certain about things that turned out to be completely backward. You've had to apologize for things you swore you'd never apologize for. You've watched yourself be the difficult one, the unreasonable one, the one who made the mountain out of nothing. And something happens to a person's psychology when they survive all that being wrong. They get humble. Not weak. Not doormat-like. Humble. There's a difference, and it's important. Humble means you can hear criticism without crumbling. You can say, "I don't know," without feeling small. You can change your mind without losing yourself. You can admit you hurt someone without your whole identity falling apart. Psychologists call this ego flexibility. Long-married people have it in abundance. They've had to develop it because staying rigid, that breaks relationships. That turns small disagreements into wars that last for years. But humility alone still isn't the deepest change that happens. There's something even more fundamental that shifted in how they think. Listen to how long-married people talk. Really listen. They use the word "we" differently than younger couples do, and it tells you something about what's happened in their minds. "We don't like spicy food. We went to bed early last night. "We're not feeling well today." At first, it sounds simple, just a pronoun. But something profound happened in their psychology. Their sense of self expanded. Research calls this self-expansion theory. Your identity actually grows to include another person, not as an add-on but as part of the core. Their memories blend together in surprising ways. Ask them to remember a trip from 20 years ago, and they'll tell the story in a mixed-up way. "You said we should take the scenic route." "No, you said that." "Did I?" The lines blur because the experiences were shared so deeply they became one memory held by two minds. Their nervous systems sync up. Studies show long-married couples' heart rates match during conversation. Their stress responses coordinate. When one hurts, the other's body actually responds with its own stress signals. This isn't romantic poetry. It's measurable biology. It's what happens when two lives intertwine for decades. But here's the strange part. This merging, it didn't make them less themselves. It made them something most people never expect. You'd think merging with someone for 40 years would erase your edges, make you blend together like watercolors running into each other until there's no distinction left. Just a muddy purple where there used to be red and blue. The opposite happens. Long-married people often become more themselves over time, more sure of their own quirks, more comfortable with their differences, more willing to say, "This is just who I am," without apologizing for it. Because they've been seen, fully seen, for decades. All the weird parts, all the difficult parts, all the parts they used to hide from other people. And they weren't rejected. That does something to a person's psychology. It gives them permission to relax into who they actually are instead of who they think they should be. Young couples often try to match each other, to like the same things, to want the same life, to prove they're compatible by becoming more similar. Long-married couples have usually stopped pretending. He loves gardening and spends hours in the dirt. She doesn't and never will. She loves museums and could wander through them all day. He'd rather stay home. And somehow, after all these years, that's okay now. Psychologists call this differentiation. Being connected without being consumed. Being together without disappearing. It sounds simple when you say it like that. It takes most people decades to figure out. But there's a cost to all this closeness that nobody mentions. 40 years of marriage means 40 years of accumulating losses together. Think about that timeline. Think about everything that happens in 4 decades of living. Friends who died too young. Parents who passed one by one until the older generation was gone. Dreams that didn't come true no matter how hard they were chased. Children who grew up and moved away. Jobs that ended. Bodies that changed. Versions of themselves they had to leave behind as time moved forward, whether they were ready or not. Long-married couples carry a shared graveyard of grief. And this changes their psychology in ways younger people can't understand yet because they haven't lived it. They haven't accumulated that much loss yet. They will. But not yet. These couples know life's fragility. Not as an idea they read about. As a lived experience they've survived together. Held each other through. Cried about at 3 in the morning. Watch how older couples touch each other. There's often a gentleness there. Carefulness. Not because they're physically fragile, though sometimes they are, but because they know how quickly people can be gone. How fast everything can change. How little control we really have. This shared grief creates a bond that goes deeper than happiness. They've held each other through the worst. They know what the worst feels like now. And that knowledge, it changes how they love. Not with less joy, but with more awareness. More gratitude for ordinary moments. More appreciation for another day together. Yet somehow they learn to find lightness again. Talk to couples married 40 years, and you'll notice something that might surprise you. They laugh. A lot. More than you'd expect from people who've seen so much loss, carried so much weight. But they're not laughing at the same jokes that make young people laugh. Not at the popular comedians or the viral videos. They're laughing at private things. Tiny things. Things that wouldn't make sense to anyone else listening because you'd have to know the whole history, the whole context built over decades. They've built a whole language together over the years. References to incidents from 1987 that still make them smile. Nicknames that evolved over time until they barely remember the original names. Ways of describing the world, people, situations that only they understand because they invented this language together. This shared humor? It's psychological medicine. It's how they survive the hard parts without breaking. Research shows that couples who laugh together handle stress better. Their conflicts are less intense. Their resilience is stronger. They bounce back faster from disagreements because they can find the absurdity in their own seriousness. But the laughter of long-married people has a different quality than young love laughter. It's not trying to impress anyone. It's not performance for others. It's the sound of two people who've seen each other at their absolute worst, their most ridiculous, their most human, and somehow still find each other amusing. There's freedom in that kind of laughter. Permission to be ridiculous, to be silly, to not take everything so seriously. But beneath the laughter, there's a skill they mastered. Young couples often fear silence. They fill it with words, with music, with the television, with anything that keeps the quiet away. Because silence feels like distance, like something's wrong, like they should be talking if they really love each other. Long-married couples have made peace with quiet. They've learned that silence isn't empty space that needs filling. It's its own kind of presence. Sit with them sometime. Notice how they can share a room without speaking. Reading separate books on opposite ends of the couch. Doing separate tasks at the kitchen table. Together but not talking. And it doesn't feel lonely. It feels comfortable. This comfort with silence represents a profound psychological achievement. It means they don't need constant reassurance anymore. Don't need to fill every gap with proof of love. With words that say, "I'm still here. Are you still here? Do you still love me?" The silence isn't empty when you've been together that long. It's full. Full of presence. Of acceptance. Of not needing anything to be different than it is right now in this moment. Brain studies show something interesting about this. When long-married couples sit in silence together, their brain activity still shows connection. They're still engaged with each other, still aware of the other person's presence. Just without words. They've learned that not everything needs to be said. Some things live better in the quiet spaces between sentences. Some understanding runs too deep for language. And in that quiet, they developed an ability most people never master. After 40 years, you know your partner's patterns like you know your own heartbeat. Like you know the layout of your house in the dark. Without thinking. Without trying. The way they move when they're tired. The specific shuffle of their walk. The sound of their breathing when they're worried about something they haven't said out loud yet. The slight shift in tone that means something's wrong even when they say they're fine. The way they hold their coffee cup when they're relaxed versus when they're tense. Long-married couples can read each other without trying. It's not mystical. It's not telepathy. It's pattern recognition. 40 years of data. 40 years of paying attention to the same person in thousands of different situations. But here's what makes it powerful. They've learned to trust what they're reading. To act on it without needing confirmation, without asking what's wrong. When they can see what's wrong. She brings him water before he asks because she noticed the small throat clearing he does when he's dehydrated. He gives her space when she comes home because he heard the specific way she closed the car door. Small adjustments. Constant calibration. Done without fanfare or credit or even conscious thought most of the time. This is emotional intelligence built over decades. Not from books or courses or therapy. From attention. From caring enough to notice. From learning this one specific person so thoroughly that reading them becomes automatic. And it creates a safety that younger couples are still building. The safety of being known. But this deep knowing came with a price they had to pay. Let's be honest about something that doesn't make it into the anniversary speeches. Staying married for 40 years meant giving things up. Real things. Important things. Pieces of who they might have been. Maybe careers they didn't pursue because someone needed to stay home, to be the stable one, to prioritize the family. Places they didn't move to because the other person's job was here, their family was here, moving wasn't possible. Versions of themselves they didn't become because they chose we over me at crucial moments when the road forked. Long-married people carry these surrendered selves quietly. the person they might have been if they'd chosen differently, if they'd been alone, if they'd put themselves first. This creates a unique psychology, a bittersweet understanding that lives in the background. They know the road not taken wasn't necessarily better, but it existed, it was possible, and they chose this road instead. And making peace with that is part of why they've lasted, because they don't spend decades resenting what they gave up. They found ways to integrate those losses into the larger story, to see them not as wrong choices but just as choices, trade-offs, the price of building something with someone else. Some found ways to circle back to old dreams later in life. Others discovered new ones that fit the life they built together. But the surrendering happened, and they survived it. What they got in return, though, is something rare. Imagine having someone who remembers when you were young, who knew you before you became who you are now, before the gray hair and the reading glasses and the careful way you get out of chairs, who remembers your parents when they were still alive, your first apartment with the broken radiator, the job you were so nervous about you couldn't sleep the night before, the dreams you used to talk about at midnight when everything seemed possible, the version of you that doesn't exist anymore except in memory. Long-married couples are witnesses to each other's entire adult lives. Think about what that means. Every important moment, every change, every version of yourself you've been. This creates a psychological anchor most people don't have. When you forget who you are, they remember. When you doubt yourself, they've seen you succeed before and can remind you. When you think you've always been this way, they know you haven't. They remember when you were different. They hold your history, your continuity, your proof that you've lived and changed and survived things you didn't think you could survive. As we age, this becomes more precious. Memory gets fuzzy around the edges. Details blur. Stories need someone else to confirm them. Did that really happen the way I remember? Yes, I was there. That's exactly how it happened. That shared history. It's irreplaceable. Can't be built quickly. Can't be rushed or forced. It requires time. Decades of it. Years of showing up. And it creates a bond that goes deeper than love. Ask people married 40 years if they love each other, and sometimes they pause. Not because they don't, but because love feels too small for what they have now. Too simple. Too incomplete. There isn't a good word for it in English. It's bigger than love. Deeper than friendship. More complex than partnership. All of those things and more, and something else entirely. It's shared infrastructure. Two lives built so completely around each other that separating them would be like trying to unbraid a rope that's been braided for decades. Intertwined roots. Two trees that grew so close together their bark merged, and now you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Psychologists sometimes call it intimate companionship. But that sounds clinical. Doesn't capture the feeling of it. Doesn't capture what it's like to live inside it. It's knowing someone will be there when you wake up. Not romantically necessarily, just factually. A constant in a changing world. Proof that something stays while everything else shifts. It's the comfort of shared routines. The safety of known patterns. The relief of not having to explain yourself or your history or why you are the way you are. It's less intense than young love, yes, but more sustaining. Less exciting, but more reliable. Less about passion, more about presence. It's the difference between a bonfire and a hearth. One blazes bright and fast and burns out. The other keeps you warm through winter, through years of winters. But maintaining that warmth required one final piece. Here's the unglamorous truth about 40-year marriages that nobody puts in the wedding vows. They're built on boring decisions, unsexy choices, small moments that didn't feel important at the time. Choosing to come home instead of staying out. Choosing to have the hard conversation instead of avoiding it and letting resentment build. Choosing to try again after failing. Choosing to apologize even when you don't feel like it. Choosing to stay when leaving felt easier, when starting over seemed tempting, when you wondered if you made a mistake all those years ago. Not once. Not in one dramatic moment. Thousands of times. In small moments. On ordinary Tuesdays. When nobody was watching. When it didn't feel heroic. Long married people understand something about commitment that younger people are still learning. It's not a feeling you have. It's not something that happens to you. It's a practice you maintain. A choice you make over and over until the choosing becomes who you are. Some days the practice feels natural, easy, like breathing. Other days it feels like work, hard work, the kind that makes you tired, the kind that makes you question why you're doing it. But they kept practicing, even when they didn't want to, especially when they didn't want to. That's when the practice matters most. This creates a psychological resilience that comes from seeing something through, from choosing something difficult and sticking with it, from not quitting when quitting was available. And eventually, the practice itself becomes meaningful. The showing up, the continuing, the not quitting, the decades accumulate, and you look back and realize you built something. Not perfect, but real, and yours. So what does all of this mean for the rest of us? People married 40 years know something the rest of us are still learning. Something you can't teach. Something that only comes from living it. That love isn't what we thought it was when we were young. It's quieter than that. More forgiving. More ordinary. More about showing up than feeling butterflies. Less about the moments that take your breath away and more about the moments that just keep coming, one after another. And you're still there. That being right matters less than being kind. That winning the argument means losing something more important. That you can be correct and cruel at the same time, and the cruelty costs more than the correctness is worth. That you can't change another person. You really can't. No matter how much you love them. No matter how right you are about what they should do. You can only change how you respond to them. How you meet them. How you choose to see them. That marriage isn't about finding the perfect person. There isn't one. It's about choosing an imperfect person and building something together anyway. Building it slowly. Building it through mistakes and repairs and trying again. That some days you'll feel distant from each other. Like strangers. Like you made a terrible mistake. That's normal. The feeling comes back if you wait. If you keep showing up. If you don't make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. That laughter saves more marriages than grand gestures. That small kindnesses matter more than big promises. That saying, "I thought of you today," matters more than expensive gifts. That you'll both change in ways you can't predict right now. The commitment is to change together. To keep choosing each other through all the versions you become. This is what 40 years teaches. Not happiness. Something deeper. Something that holds you when happiness fades and returns again. Something that lasts.